Today, we are going to break down the 3 ways in which you can raise private capital for hard money lending. In whichever way you decide to go, the presentation and closing process is going to be the same and should result in very close to 100% conversion.
Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your host from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the show. Quick disclaimer before we get started here, since we are talking about raising capital, make sure to talk to your securities attorney to get all of your legal ducks in a row. We aren't lawyers ourselves. We aren't giving any legal advice. We're talking about the business side of this stuff. All right, so let's dive in. 3 ways that you can raise capital, structure the capital for the private or hard money lending business. One is called co-lending or direct placement. Another one is a Reg D fund. And the third one is called Unsecured Notes. And whichever one you go with, and we have people in our mastermind group that use all of those different ways, right? Whichever one you go with, we're going to show you the presentation and closing process, how to break down your investors in essence, like in terms of personality type, common professions, amount of investable capital, and then how you present to them and close people and follow up to convert damn near close to 100%.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Almost 100% if you do this the right way and you follow the process. And again, just like Chris said, it doesn't matter which model you're using. The process is very similar throughout. And I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong flow or right and wrong model. It depends on who you are. Some areas of the country like the co-lending and direct placement side, some want to do a full fund because they find that to be easier. And then, some like the unsecured notes. I think personally that's would be the hardest to do, but I've always been surprised because, there's members in the mastermind group, online and offline community that have it set up like that. And some of the ones that have even been talked to as securities attorneys and had even, take it to the next level, they've actually even put like a security wrapper around it. And but in essence, the capital investors are sending, investing through their entity to the real estate investor, to the hard money lender, and, through unsecured notes. Yeah, that might be secured to the business entity, but not to the individual deals. And then they're lending it out and paying either preferred return or a debt return, however it's structured, kind of similar to a full Reg D fund. So again, there's no right or wrong. I think if somebody was starting from scratch, again, check with your attorney, but the co-lending model might be the cleanest way to start with, something very, very simple, just to kind of get your relationships going. And then as you grow and as you scale, maybe the fund model makes it slightly easier for you. But again, there's pros and cons of both.
Yeah, let's start by defining what these 3 models are. We're going to run through some of the pros and cons of each business-wise, and then we're going to get into like the presentation and closing stuff. So starting off with co-lending, also known as direct placement, also known on the West Coast as trust deed investing, all means the same thing. In essence, how it works is you fund loans from your company and then you assign the loan to the people who invested in it, who funded it, right? So it could be closed under Hard Money Bankers LLC, our company, and then assigned to Chris Haddon 50% and Jason Balin 50%. And you could do that either via assignment, like I just described. Some people like participation agreements. We don't do it that way exactly. And kind of the old school way to do it is like you actually put your investors' names on the note and the mortgage or deed of trust. That's not done too much anymore, but that used to be very common back in the day. So quick pros and cons about this structure. The main con is that it can be a little clunky in terms of investor relations and moving money, communicating with people back and forth for each deal that you close. And making sure people have the full file, they know what they're looking at, answer questions. Like it could just be a little labor intensive on the investor relations side. Some of the pros of co-lending, one is that you're only paying your investors when the lending company, gets paid. Whenever the borrower makes the payment, that's when it's dispersed through to whoever invested in it. And that's different than some of the other models that we'll get to soon. So some of the quick pros and cons on that one. Anything else to add to that before
I would say that raising capital and the capital investor knows they're tied to the individual property and they're not pooled together
Good point.
in all of them and have lack of control. I think that's a pro for some people. Other people might not think that's a pro. Somebody rather be like, oh, if I have $100,000 invested, I'd rather it be spread out over 100 deals instead of all of it in one deal. So it can be a pro or con anyways.
No, that's a good point. And that was a huge one for us when we were first starting HMB, is that our capital investors really wanted to know what they were investing in. It was 2007, 8. Everyone was terrified of real estate. Everything had just crashed. I'm sure everyone knows that whole story. But being able to underwrite deal to deal is something that our investors have gotten very, very used to, right? They've gotten very used to that. And so to change it to a structure like a fund where they're not going to see the deals might be a bit of a shock to people. So anyway, yes, I would put that as a pro as well. It can make it a bit easier to raise capital. Okay. Now let's talk about funds. Funds are very popular. Reg D Funds. I don't know all the different numbers and letters and stuff like that since we don't run one, but very familiar with it. Probably maybe a third of our mastermind group is operating a Reg D fund. And some of the business pros and cons. So a pro is that the opposite of co-lending, it removes a lot of the heavy lifting investor relations, communications back and forth. Because when somebody invests in the fund, they're buying shares in the fund, they put $500K into it, let's say, and then you lend it out as you see fit according to your private placement memorandum and your whole business plan, right? You don't have to communicate with the investors when you're funding deals or when they're paying off or whatever. That's a big part of it, is that it removes a lot of investor relations. Also, some investors, like we mentioned before, could see this as mitigating their risk because they're spread across the whole portfolio. They aren't invested in 1 or 2 or 3 deals in particular. That's an important part there. Some of the cons, it can have a heavy upfront cost. These things can cost between like $10,000 and $50,000 to set up with legal fees and filings, business entities, everything else. It could make investor relations more difficult. That really depends on who you're talking to, how it's all set up. And one of the main cons, too, actually, there are financial risks for your business related to the fund. For example, if you have 5 people, or let's just say 10% of your portfolio in a given month doesn't pay you, the borrowers don't make the payments, which is common in any kind of lending, especially this kind, you still have to pay the fund. And so that can create a big, big drag on your financial resources when you have to cover that nut each and every month in and out. The fund gets paid regardless. The fund gets paid first. And everything on top of that is going to go to the lending company as profit, there's risk there. If anybody's run a lending company for a substantial amount of time, you know that not everybody pays on time. That's just the way it goes. Anything else to add on the fund
No,
side?
I think that's the risk. And on the other side of that, if the fund can support and float, that if there's any wins from defaults, right, default interest, foreclosure proceedings, that in essence you pay back the property and everything goes back into the fund, there could also be profit hits, right? Because the fund's not making, or the investors in the fund aren't making more money on a default rate like a direct placement model could be set up, right? On a direct placement model, potentially the capital investors could see some upside of defaulted loans. In a fund, maybe not. So again, personal preference. So you want to go through unsecured notes. It's for the most part similar to a fund for related to the debt payments.
Yeah, for the debt payments, the mechanics are a little bit different. And again, like we mentioned before, talk to a securities attorney about how this can all be structured in a legal way. We talk about the business side. We don't talk about the legal side. So make sure to do that. Unsecured notes, the way that works is, for example, and we don't do this structure either, but Hard Money Bankers LLC could borrow unsecured money from capital investors. Say you're paying 10% annual. and you take in 500K from one investor, they're not seeing deal to deal. They learn about the type of lending that you're doing and what the portfolio looks like. You probably show them some stats and, performance over the years, whatever works. And then they're just doing an unsecured note to your company. And it's going to create a lot of paperwork in doing these unsecured notes, these promissory notes from your company to these investors, different amounts, possibly even varying payment dates, depending on how you set it up. But this too takes away a lot of the investor relations. After you take a $500,000 note and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to pay you 10% per year, I'm paying monthly. That's kind of the end of the investor relations. All you got to do is make sure you pay them on time every month. And your deals, so your funding, that's all up to you. There's not going to be any investor relations communications related to that. But like the debt fund, regardless of what happens with your portfolio, if you have money sitting on the sideline or if you have people who aren't paying you, you have to pay your unsecured note obligations. So again, that can create a real pinch in terms of cash flow, or at other times during the year, it could be a big windfall because there could be other stuff that's coming in, default interest, late fees, extension fees, all that kind of thing. And that's going to turn into straight profit for your company. And all you have to do is service your notes at 10%, if that's what you're paying, whatever it might be.
Yep. So let's go through the process. We can talk about DISC slightly, and then we can just kind of jump into, I don't know, I think it's like an 8 or 9 step process of, talking to an investor, emailing them a pitch deck, to meetings, to things like that.
Okay. Yeah, let's break it down. So starting with our investor targets, one of the things that we learned early on, we're targeting the right sort of people by personality type. And you may or may not be familiar with the DISC personality profile. Not going to go too deep into that because we have a number of things to get through. But I will say that we target the D and the S, and we stay away from the I and the C. We have other videos on this topic that goes more in depth on DISC, but let's just leave it there for right now. Now, common professions is another way to dial it in. Common professions that we have found to be great capital investors are business owners, finance people, people in real estate, professionals like doctors, attorneys, accountants. Accountants could kind of creep over into the C personality type, but still, in our experience, we found them to be very, very good capital investors. And then also some more passive folks, people with self-directed retirement accounts, maybe people who are older and have accumulated a lot of net worth over the years, even though they aren't totally like real serious business operators and underwriters of real estate and finance people and everything else. They would probably fall into the S personality type. And we found that it's helpful to start narrowing down the population by some of the stuff, personality type, common professions, and then also their proximity to you. So we found that everyone that you will need to fund, like our lending company is 50 million outstanding. And of course, we didn't start with 50 million. We've been growing this for 18 years, but everyone that has come our way has been either a first degree connection or a second degree connection. First degree is somebody who you know right now, somebody you know, friends, family, business associates. Second degree connection is everyone that they know, which turns into a ton of people, like tens of thousands of people when you multiply those. And so within those two, you'll be able, with a lot of work, with a lot of heavy lifting, investor relations, raising capital is a daily job, especially when you're actively raising, you'll be able to find all the money that you need for lending. It doesn't require marketing, advertising, anything cold at all outside of those 2 degrees of connections. Really isn't required. And that's a surprise to a lot of people who get into this capital raising game, whether it's for lending or real estate or whatever it might be. The money's a bit closer to you than you think. It just requires a lot of work, a lot of reach out, a lot of going through the process that we're going to describe here in a second.
And also assuming that you have access to real deals and you have good deals, good deals, everything happens everything is fueled and every good thing happens if you have good deals. Good borrowers that have real opportunities where they're bringing real money to the table and they have good credit and things like that. If you have bad deals, everything is going to come crashing down.
If you have bad deals or no deals, you're not really going to get anywhere with capital.
That's right. You need good opportunities, and you need to find good opportunities over and over and over to lend out, because that second, especially early on, one time you do a bad opportunity, it's going to be a headache, right? It's going to be a headache getting the deal to closing. It's going to be a headache for a capital investor to want to be involved in the deal. It's going to be a headache working with the borrower, and then it's just going to be a headache working with the capital investor that you're not able to service the payment or service the debt or whatever the case, however your capital structure is. So so this is assuming all good deals. And the first part of the process of potentially working with a new capital investor is emailing them the pitch deck. And before anything happens, before you actually sit down and have a meeting with them or things like that, they're interested in you email them a pitch deck, small pitch deck, right? It doesn't have to be, most of these are business owners and they understand the concept to begin with. They don't want a 30-page, pitch deck. They want something very, very simple of how the process works. And a big part of that is what sample deals are, either deals you've done in the past or what a sample deal will look like. And a sample deal meaning be like, okay, these are the types of deals that we're doing. They're going to be in this location. This is the down payment that most of the borrowers are going to bring to the table. This is kind of the credit score range. This is the closing timeline, things like that, right? The qualifications. We've done videos on the 4 C's in the past. So, at this point, this is knowing what types of deals that you're doing. And then when a capital investor gets that pitch deck and looks at those sample deals, be like, oh crap. Okay. So the property is going to be in, Columbia, Maryland. The real estate investor is going to put down 30% of their own cash. They're going to have a 700 credit score. They have some experience. Like, this is a real deal that, I'd like to be involved in. Either I'll be the first position lender on the deal, or the fund is going to be a first position lender on the deal and I'll be an investor in the fund. Like, this is something worth having a conversation with.
Yeah. So as you're going through this, it's a good idea to keep a spreadsheet, something simple, with the first degree people that and the second degree people, meaning you're asking your first degree network for referrals to anyone they know who might be a good fit. Somebody who's savvy, understands what's going on here, have a good amount of investable capital, all of that, right? And then making your reach outs like Jason was describing. It does make sense to start with an email and try to get a call. You can try to get a call, in-person meeting, or Zoom. Zoom's a great tool for this as well, that we didn't have back in the day when we were actively raising. And yeah, the reality is that a lot of people aren't going to read your pitch deck at first, but they are going to look at the body of the email in all likelihood. So putting that snapshot of here's what we do. We lend in DC Metro, average loan amount. Here's how much the investment pays, all of that stuff, average loan to value, credit score, in the body of the email as well, just in case they don't look at that attachment, which a lot of busy people won't, and see what kind of meeting they're willing to do. Call, Zoom, in-person's best, of course. And sometimes you can get those. And during that meeting, go through your pitch deck. It shouldn't be too long, maybe 7-8 pages of, large font, some graphs, something easy to read and go through quickly. Not a ton of dense reading. Nobody's looking for that. And then during a meeting, you would go through it and say, okay, here's what our deals look like. Here's our geographic area. Here's our historical performance. Here's some information about the owners, the principals, people in charge of this thing. And there you go. And at the end of this meeting, it's very important to let your prospects know that, like, say you only have one deal on the pipeline and it's already funded. And while you're actively raising capital, that will be the case. You don't have that many deals yet. You don't have that much capital yet. That's okay. Let people know that you're fully funded right now. You have 1 or 2 more deals closing this month. They're already spoken for, and you're growing. So you should have some opportunity for them in the next 30 or 60 days. I find that to be a good time frame. 2 things you want to avoid: don't push that too far out into the future. People could lose interest, or maybe they take their money into another kind of opportunity. But also at the same time, you don't want to pitch anyone in the first meeting on a live deal, fund one closing next week. That's a bad idea. It'll spook them. It'll make it look like you need the money. It'll, possibly turn a good relationship sour kind of at the beginning. Don't be too overeager, right? Like when you date someone, for example, you take your time. You have a few meetings. You go out a few times, right? Like same exact kind of thing. Don't try to close on the first meeting. Very important. And then after a month or so, regardless of what kind of fund structure you have, it works the same way because they're basically buying into you and they're buying into your deals. So when you reach out to them, you have a live deal, you're able to take their funds on, get on the phone and go through the full file, right? Here's what we talked about. It's a bread and butter deal. It's not a super home run 20 LTV because you don't want to spoil them. It's also not a bad deal because we never show a bad deal to anybody. It's a regular average bread and butter deal because we need to get investors comfortable with what our average deals look like. So you go through the full file. You really only have to do this the first time, maybe the second time, but go through everything. Like go through your valuation, the credit, any other borrower financials. Here's a scope of work if it's a construction project, and make sure that they really, really understand what's going on and know what to expect. And then they say yes almost all the time because you've been preparing this for a while. And let me back up one part because there's a little part I left out, and that's some of the follow-up. During that first meeting and a month or two later, I have a live deal with you. It's a very, very good idea to keep an email broadcast list only with your capital investor clients. And once a week, you send out email broadcasts, not soliciting money, not hard selling, not a right hook, anything like that, just pointing out little wins that are happening at your company. Okay, HMB just closed this loan. It was $500K. It's going to pay the investor 10% annual. Or, oh, hey, look at this before and after. This is a rehab loan we did. Here's what it looked like when it funded. Here's what it looked like when it hit the market. Or, hey, a loan just paid off. We collected X amount of interest during the loan term. Any little wins that you can point to. Hey, Jason just spoke at a local real estate meetup. Whatever's going on at the company that you can point to, you're going to want to send that out every week because that's going to keep your prospects warm. And then when you reach out to them with a live deal, they're going to have seen that you're doing all this stuff since the last time you spoke. Business is going well, right? That's an important part too. That's really, really going to increase your conversion rate. So back to this transaction, they agree to the deal. It's a totally normal $300K loan in Montgomery County, Maryland, exactly what we talked about. This is an absolute bread and butter thing. And at this point in time, they should be saying yes, because everything that you're presenting to them is exactly what you said was going to happen. Some people will try to, just to be savvy or to take control of the situation, turn down deal number one. And the scripting around that is, look, this is a very, very common type of deal for us. This is our bread and butter. It's a $300K fix and flip loan in Montgomery County, Maryland, one of our home markets. And it's at 60 loan to value. All the boxes are checked. So if you're not comfortable with this deal, maybe this isn't the right kind of investment for you because frankly, they all look like this. They all look like this. And at that point in time, most people will be like, oh, okay then. Yeah, I'm good with that. And then you send them your agreements, have them signed, whatever your structure might be, get it all papered. They wire in the funds and you're ready for closing.
And following this process works. I mean, you're almost like you're not going to get to the next step unless the first step worked out. Like for instance, if they don't like the sample deals that you showed them, then they either don't understand the model or they're just not going to be a good fit for it, right? Like if they're, a buy question that typically will always happen is this. And if you get this, that this is going to, you'll close them on your fund or on your investment model. If they say, wow, that deal seems too good to be true, why wouldn't this borrower just go to a bank? And be like, well, that's a good question. And most of the borrowers we lend to are bankable. They do have good credit. They do have a big cash down payments. They do have other options, but banks don't really like construction loans. Banks can't close in 5 or 6 or 7 days. They need a month. And most real estate investors need to move quickly and they're willing to pay higher return for quick and flexible capital. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, that does make sense. Like, and that question comes up almost every time. And if that question comes up, they get it and they know it's like, oh, wow, these are really, really good deals. So obviously it's important to have really, really good deals and or this isn't like what you can't say is like, hey, what do you think of this deal? What do you think of this deal? What do you think of this deal? Like, remember, you're the expert. You're bringing in the deals for your fund or for your business. So you know what's good and what's not. And then from there, everything snowballs, right? Like you're going to define your communication system with the investors. If you're going to do investor notifications, when do payments get dispersed, and the transactions, you just doing transactional stuff, wiring them money, giving them investor reporting. That is the marketing in order to generate more and more capital, for them to put more capital into the fund, for them to invest in the next deal, for them to tell their friends and their family, hey, I put money into these deals and they're great. We lend on these particular projects in these particular areas. And that's the snowball that in essence makes the capital raising machine easy over time. And it just grows and grows and grows and grows.
Yeah. And one thing I would recommend is get on a proper loan servicing, loan management software sooner than you think, before you think you need it, because it's going to end up growing your capital base for you. Like whether you're on Lender, TMO, Automator, those are three of the popular ones. I would get off of spreadsheets and QuickBooks as soon as possible and get onto one of the industry solutions, because it's going to look way more professional to your investors. You're going to be able to touch them more frequently with electronic payments, payment notifications going by email, monthly statements that look really slick. Like this is all important stuff to running a professional operation that's managing lots of money. It should be like that, right? Like the days of, cutting checks from QuickBooks and no monthly statements and manually doing 1098s and 1099s in January is like, that's not the best way to do it. And I think that people in the mastermind would agree that the sooner the better in terms of getting onto proper software. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Those are the 3 common ways of structuring the capital, the presentation and closing process. We've been developing this for a long time, so I hope you got something out of it. There's always chatter going on about this kind of stuff inside hardmoneymastermind.com. We hope to see you there, and we'll see you here next time on the podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.